This is one of Spain's newest airports. A disaster has happened here, but it's got nothing to do with this plane or any of these passengers.
Es la última vez que duermo con ansiolíticos a todo el pasaje.
In fact, they're not even passengers. They're all extras in the latest film by Spanish director Pedro Almodovar. The airport hasn't had any real passengers for a while because it closed 3 years ago, less than 4 years after it opened. Had Alex Acero been a real pilot, he'd have spotted the giant yellow crosses painted on the runway telling him not to land there. The year is 2015 and Ciudad Real International Airport has just been sold. Not for its construction cost of €1 billion or for its asking price of €100 million, and not even for its discount price of €40 million. No, a Chinese company called Tanzan International has just snapped it up for €10,000. So at this point, a couple of questions jump to mind. What the hell went wrong here, and why would anyone want to buy an airport that costs less than a set of air stairs? This is Madrid's Barajas Airport. It serves over 60 million passengers a year, flying to more than 200 destinations around the world. It's big, some would even say too big, or at least that was the thinking that led to one of Spain's worst ever infrastructure fails. But first, let me set the scene. In the late 90s, Spain's economy was on the up. Entry into the euro in 1999 gave the country access to historically low interest rates. That led to a construction boom across the nation as companies raced to take advantage of cheap money. One especially popular way of doing this was the Public-Private Partnership, or PPP. It works like this. So you have a public body like a local government that needs a new piece of infrastructure like a railway. So they team up with a private company who will build and operate it. That private company then takes out a loan with a small deposit from one of Spain's many regional savings banks. The company wins because it now owns a thriving piece of infrastructure, having put very little down up front. And the local government wins because it now has its new railway without having to get its hands dirty or take on too much liability. Now, this new way of building infrastructure also coincided with a revolution in Europe's airline industry, as the popularity of low-cost carriers like Ryanair and EasyJet began to quite literally take off. Right across Europe, a wave of smaller secondary airports sprung up to meet demand. Which brings us to the small city of Ciudad Real, population 75,000. Its attractions include a medieval city gate, a water park, and a museum on Miguel Cervantes' 15th century novel Don Quixote.
The idea came out from the Chamber of Commerce of Castilla-La, of Ciudad Real. So in 1987, it began being discussed the possibility of building an airport, also because the airport of Madrid was getting overcrowded, right?
That last point there is really, really key. In the late 90s, Madrid Airport was bursting at the seams, and the Ciudad Real Chamber of Commerce calculated that they wouldn't be able to grow enough to keep up with demand. So they figured that if they built their own airport down in Ciudad Real, they could scoop up some of those excess passengers bound for Madrid. So later that year, a new company, Aeropuerto, was born, and the planning began. Now, when I'm writing the scripts for our videos, I spend ages researching all kinds of different news sources to make sure that what I'm telling you guys is correct. But the news cycle these days can be pretty divisive, and it's tough to cut through the drama and just get to the facts. Which is why I'm a really big fan of Straight Arrow News. Their app and website have tools that showcase the biases that other news organisations have, and there's really great analysis on how things are being reported. There's so many super partisan outlets these days trying to pass themselves off as neutral, so I find this honest approach really refreshing. Take trade tariffs, for example. It's such a political issue that it's really difficult to cut through the noise and get reliable, impartial information. Sam's been covering this a lot lately, and on each article it shows you what outlets from across the political spectrum are saying. It's a really transparent way of giving you information that lets you make up your own mind. And if you like credentials, Straight Arrow News has got a perfect rating on trust and reliability from NewsGuard, and a centre rating from all sides. We've worked with Straight Arrow News quite a bit recently, and I've been using their app ever since because it really is a great way to get information. It's completely free to use, so there's no excuse not to check out that QR code on screen or head to the link down there in the video description. It massively helps us out when you guys take the time to go and look at our video sponsors. Whenever you click on those links, it helps us continue to make great videos for you, so please do take the time to go and look at it. Now, we are nowhere near done talking about Ciudad Real airports, so let's get back to it. The first phase would see a 28,000 square metre terminal built here. That would be equipped with 24 check-in desks and 10 boarding gates, initially capable of serving around 2 million passengers a year, but rising to 5 million by 2025. Space was also reserved to build another terminal which could take capacity up to 9 million if there was sufficient demand. The kinds of secondary airports that inspired Ciudad Real usually cater for low-cost airlines which use smaller aircraft, things like the Boeing 737, Airbus A320 and that kind of thing. But Ciudad Real wanted to go bigger, much, much bigger. This is the Airbus A380, the largest passenger aircraft ever constructed. It was due to enter service around the time that Ciudad Real was planned to open, and that provided an opportunity for the airport's developers. If their airport could handle the A380, then it could compete with Spain's major airports, not just the budget ones. But to pull that off, they didn't just need a long runway, they needed a monster. So they built one, 4 kilometres long. To put that into context, that's longer than nearly every commercial passenger runway in Europe. Even today, only a handful are longer. Alongside that, they laid a parallel taxiway. Now at smaller airports, planes often get on and off the runway via direct access ramps. It's a cheaper way of doing it, but it does limit capacity. A parallel taxiway means you can have planes lined up and ready to go as soon as the runway's clear. They even separated access for different aircraft types, one road here for A380s and another here for smaller jets. In other words, this wasn't just a modest regional airport, this was a major global hub. Okay, so how about getting to and from the airport? Well, this was a real masterstroke of strategic planning. A small car park was planned to accommodate the handful of passengers arriving by road, but the main entry point would make use of this, the Madrid to Seville high-speed rail line. This was the cheat code that would let Ciudad Real compete in the big leagues of Spanish aviation. A new station would be built and connected to the airport by a pedestrian bridge. Once on a train, passengers could be whisked off to the centre of Madrid in under an hour. The developer was so confident of this link, they expected 80% of all their passengers to use it. So a great plan, but what to call it? Well, with a museum nearby, why not go for the name of the region's most famous fictional character? And so, in 2002, construction works began on the Don Quixote International Airport. And it wasn't long before they ran into trouble. The region the airport sits in is marked by large bird conservation areas known as ZPAS. Back in the planning stages, the original site was found to lie in one of these areas, the Campo de Calatrava. Now, to state the obvious, planes and birds don't really mix. So after a few studies, they moved the airport to its current location here. But take a look at this map. The footprint of the airport lies just outside a ZPA. This caught the eye of the European Union, which decided the impact this could have on the local wildlife hadn't been properly assessed. So in 2004, when construction was about halfway through, the EU told them to stop. After more than a year of legal wrangling, construction works were finally allowed to restart in 2006, but only under some strict conditions. The airport had to shrink, flight paths were adjusted, nature reserves were expanded, and more than 600 hectares of the plan were scrapped entirely, meaning that any hope of future expansion was kind of lost. In December 2008, after a delay of 2 years, the airport finally opened for business. And if you think things got off to a flying start, then no. The airport's 200 employees waited 6 months before the first plane landed, and things didn't get any better from there.
In 2009, they got the 54,000 passengers. This means 27, actually, because most of them go both round trips. So, I mean, even if they had been 80,000, 100,000, this is far from what an airport needs in order to be sustainable.
So, what went wrong? Well, during that hiatus, when the EU was in a flap about some birds, something major happened elsewhere.
Luchamos contra el tiempo, pero seguimos construyendo. puentes y sueños.
In 2006, Madrid Barajas Terminal 4 opened, almost doubling the capacity of the airport. The very thing that Ciudad Real's backers had bet against happening, happened.
Hay ocasiones en que todo se junta milagrosamente.
While things were coming together in Madrid, they were falling apart in Ciudad Real. Passenger numbers flatlined. At first, only 2 airlines flying domestic routes used the airport, and both of those were short-lived. It wasn't until a Ryanair jet arrived from London Stansted in 2010 that it received its first international flight. That route lasted just 5 months before it was scrapped. Things were so bad, airport staff desperately tried to find ways to pass the time. In one BBC News article, a former employee was quoted as saying, "We had races on anything that had wheels. Some people used to go out to pick asparagus or catch rabbits." At 2:15 on the 29th of October 2011, Welling flight VY 1999 took off from Ciudad Real and became the last passenger service to ever use the airport. 6 months later, in April 2012, it closed. Now, you might be thinking, if only those pesky bureaucrats hadn't got involved, then everything would have been fine. And sure, Madrid's new terminal would have opened, but Ciudad Real would have opened first and could have stood something of a fighting chance. But that's just not the case. You see, all this stuff around the bird protection zone was just the tip of the iceberg. You may remember this.
It was the worst day on Wall Street since the crash of 1987.
Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate.
So horrible.
The 2008 financial crash hit the aviation industry hard. Flights across Europe plummeted and airlines began to drop like flies. In the first 9 months of 2009, 14 European airlines either went bust or were taken over by larger companies. So that thinned the herd for the low-cost airlines, but what about the very lucrative long-haul carriers? It was there that Ciudad Real had that ace up its sleeve with the A380. What happened to that? Well, it's doubtful that any airline flying the A380 was looking for alternative Spanish destinations in the first place. But regardless of that, there was a much simpler reason that no 380 would ever land at Ciudad Real. Aside from that runway and the massive apron, the airport's owners didn't build any other infrastructure to accommodate these enormous planes. A380s need to park at gates that have up to 3 jet bridges. Ciudad Real doesn't have any at any of its gates. And that's before you get into the increased amount of check-in desks and baggage reclaim belts all needed to handle these swarms of passengers. As if that wasn't enough, there was yet another slam dunk reason why this airport was doomed for failure. Its location wasn't just bad for birds, it was pretty terrible for people too. Now, anyone who's ever flown a low-cost airline is used to being dumped in the middle of nowhere. But Ciudad Real took things to a whole new level. Take London, for example. If you've ever had to get to Luton or Stansted for an 8 AM flight, you'll know what a nightmare they are to get to. Still, they're only about 50 kilometres away from the centre of the city. Now, have a look at this. Ciudad Real is a whopping 170 kilometres from Madrid. That's like having an airport for New York in Scranton, Pennsylvania. But that's what the high-speed train was for, right? You leave the plane and then 50 minutes later you're eating churros in the Plaza Mayor.
You need to take into account that people need to get the luggage, or need to go out, need to go to the station, need to wait for the train. If you don't have a express service, which is extremely expensive, there was no way for this to happen. They just figured out, okay, it's 1 hour 15 plane and then 1 hour train, 2.5. No, it doesn't work this way.
Okay, so the train was a bad idea, but it's still an idea, right? It might have been inconvenient, but it was still the main way of getting to the station. It was still a viable option. But what happened to that actual high-speed rail station? Let me just double check what they did here. Oh yeah, that's right, yeah. They forgot to build it. This is the airport terminal, this is the bridge connecting the terminal to the train station, and this is an open stretch of track where a station should be.
I'm not sure why they didn't build the station, but I'm sure that they realized that, well, there was nobody to carry the train, and that the train was not going to stop. I mean, the fact that a train track passes somewhere does not mean it's going to stop. I mean, basically, besides these high-speed rail trains. So they are not regional trains that can stop every 10 kilometers. Now, before we move on to what happened next, you might be wondering why I've been calling it Ciudad Real Airport instead of Don Quixote.
Well, he may be La Mancha's most famous literary creation, but he's still an odd choice to name an airport after. For those of you who haven't read Cervantes' 400-year-old novel, it's based on the farcical adventures of Don Quixote, a delusional fantasist unaware of his own incompetence. Does that ring any bells for you? At some point, before the airport opened, its name was quietly changed from Don Quixote to Ciudad Real Airport. We can only speculate as to the reason why. In keeping with its good luck so far, in June 2012, the company behind the airport was declared bankrupt. Later that year, those crosses were indeed painted onto the runway to stop pilots landing there accidentally. There were lots of attempts to sell the airport, all of which failed. That was until 2015, when in a now infamous auction, a single bidder bought the site for just €10,000. Ultimately, that deal was blocked by a judge before it was finalised, and the current owners snapped it up in 2018 for €56 million. In 2019, it was turned into a long-term storage and maintenance hub. Ironically, the airport saw its biggest uptick in business during the COVID pandemic when no one was flying anywhere. That extra long runway and the huge apron space made it the perfect choice for airlines looking to park their unused planes. It's pretty clear that Ciudad Real is never again going to reopen as a passenger airport. So what happens to all the money it lost? Well, this is where things get complicated, because as it turns out, those public-private partnerships we discussed earlier weren't quite as risk-free as they seemed. All these deals contained a clause which ultimately held the Spanish government liable for all costs if the project failed. The local savings bank that funded Ciudad Real was bailed out, leaving local residents largely unaffected. The problem was that this was just one of a slew of failed PPPs set up during Spain's construction boom that also went bust, all of which contributed to the worst banking crisis in Spanish history.
If it was a savings bank being bankrupt, this was taken by government. So actually the impact might not have been huge in the region. They might have had the money coming in construction companies, hiring people in the region, so it might not even have been a loss. If you have one in one country, one region, not big, I mean, okay, it's bad, but it's not big. The issue is that we had many. One in Ciudad Real, one in Lleida, one in Murcia, high-speed rail to nowhere with nobody in. So when you add up, then you got these large numbers. We have a saying, this means this was the chocolate of the parrot. The problem is that we had many parrots.
It's unclear what the future holds for Ciudad Real International Airport, but whatever happens, it seems this is one farce without an ending. Remember guys, if you want to get the news without all the usual distraction and biases, then check out the link to Straight Arrow News down there in the video description. And as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, make sure you're subscribed to the B1M.